Awhi mai, awhi atu, tato, tato e. We all help one another. Together we will be strong. Good morning. I think this is why we're all here today, because as New Zealanders, we are born with this insatiable appetite for understanding what is happening in the world around us and for accepting the challenge of together building great things in order to be successful on the world stage. But quite simply, this topic of building great global business is vast, as you know. So I thought about three issues in particular which have been important in my experiences, and I'll share these with you. Firstly, the importance of taking time to get strategy right and how, with the right team behind it, this can help build your business momentum. Secondly, looking at a couple of the complexities of international trade, how these are continuing to evolve, and how they can either support or risk your brand and business performance as you grow. And thirdly, this aspect of cultural development as your organisation moves from an international exporter model to more of a true global organisation. But before I start, I'd like to say that I've worked with some exceptional people, and I'd like to thank them for everything they have given me and for what we have achieved together over the years in business. And I'd also like to say that the thoughts I talk about today here are shaped by my experiences of business. However, you have got your own, and I think the power of Aotearoa comes together when we share and learn, and this is when we really get good at this. Just a little bit of background on me to give you some context. I was born and bred in Wellington, shown here on what my mother would say is just an absolute typical day in the capital. After attending Wellington College, I studied business at the prestigious Massey University and later completed my MBA at the University of New England in Australia. I live in Auckland with my wife Julie and our children Emily and Tom, and we enjoy lots of sports, a bit of travel and skiing. And for my sins, I play some highly erratic golf, which is very, very exciting. In terms of my background in business, I started my career trading currencies for Barclays in Wellington and then other banks in London and Sydney. This taught me a lot about finance. It gave me an understanding of what risk looks like, and it also told me how to drink a lot of beer back in those days. GPR Daler was an international management consulting firm where I worked in Australia and also had some time in South Africa. This gave me great exposure to a range of different business models, different industries, cultures, and leadership styles. Then at George Weston Foods, they gave me my first CEO roles of a couple of large industrial and B2B companies which had operations throughout Australasia and Southeast Asia. I then took on the role as CEO of one of their large FMCG businesses, which spread from agriculture at one end through to the customer and markets at the other, and with lots of people, factories, and distribution in between. In 2006, when Julie and I were looking to return to New Zealand, we invested with two other shareholders to buy a company called Premier Bacon. This was the home of the wonderful Beehive Streaky Bacon brand, and we also took on Freedom Farms brand under license. After some really good growth, we ultimately sold the business as a part of a larger group into JBS, the world's largest protein company in the world. I Love Food was a stunning young company founded by two highly creative entrepreneurs. I invested into I Love together with my investment partner in 2015, and we worked from the board table to help build this company over several years including into Australia and into China. We recently sold the company into the heart-backed food group Walter and Wild. Following this Beehive sale, I went into Manuka Health as CEO and as a stakeholder, and we will talk more about that in a moment. I'm a great believer in the power of resetting strategy in order to unleash an organisation's cultural energy. This is particularly powerful when going into a company as the new CEO, but also highly relevant when there's been an ownership change, which typically can make people very nervous about their futures. So for me, going about understanding the market, the industry, customers as best you can, then framing up a strategy to get going is critical. The better you engage your team in this process, the more likely you are to build a new sense of direction with some real energy behind it. So at Manuka Health, which was quite significant and a potentially disruptive ownership change, we immediately went about setting the new strategy, and I'll give you some sense of three of the key things here. Firstly, we knew we had to build an exceptional leadership and broader management group, both from within the talent pool that was in the business, but also people we brought in, that had the capability and the energy to take the business through the strong growth that we were going to take the company through, and also that could complete a huge transformation across all parts of the business. Secondly, Manuka honey is a scarce and high-value raw material, so we decided we needed to vertically integrate back into the agricultural supply chain. This was going to give us control of the honey supply so we could ensure we could meet our big growth aspirations. It would help us participate in some of the margin pool which had grown substantially along with the price of honey back into that agri part of the supply chain. And also, thirdly, it would give us a connection of our brand and our consumers around the world back to New Zealand and the wonderful art of beekeeping. And on the third point, yes, on the market side, we knew there was this huge global consumer trend of people looking for natural health solutions. But at the same time, we recognised that we didn't know a lot about our business beyond the borders. We had a wide and diverse group of distributors with over 45 countries, and we knew very little about those partners in terms of their focus and capabilities. We didn't have any connection really with some of the big retailers in the core markets, so we weren't really at the table with the retailers helping them navigate and manage through this new category. And we had little control over how the brand was being presented across some of these markets. But most importantly, we didn't really have visibility across all of these countries of who the consumer actually was. We did know for a company of our size, which at that stage was sort of 50 or 60 million, but that we didn't simply have the bandwidth or the resources to be able to focus on growing all of those 45 countries the business was exporting to. So we decided we needed to get control of what we called were our tier one markets, the likes of Germany, Japan, USA, and China. So by giving the organisation what was a fairly straightforward plan, but also a renewed ambition supported by three core values, we quickly got the company focused again and really moving ahead. We all know we operate in an increasingly complex marketplace. What I'm going to talk about here is the issue of understanding and controlling channels and staying ahead of the changes to your financial structure as you take over more of your supply chain. This is only one dimension of the growth of international trade without even looking at other layers such as regulatory compliance or geopolitical risk. Traditionally, trade routes into international markets were relatively linear. It is reasonably straightforward to understand the pathways your product travelled to get to the end consumer. In this environment, you generally had more control or certainly greater visibility of who controlled pricing, where the margin pools resided, and where inventories were sitting in a market. Now there is greater fluidity of trade across the world, and this brings an increased level of complexity for companies to manage. And when you overlay the impact of e-commerce trading, I feel the challenges and variables to be controlled across the channels have increased exponentially. If we consider just one example of this in Manuka Health, we could look at the United States market. Here we had a base business mainly across the East Coast and West Coast of the country and largely through independent health stores. We grew this up into larger retailers such as Whole Foods and Sprouts. And on top of this, we grew new business with Costco on the East Coast. This was all good. And in particular with Costco, who took us into more of their international markets with a global network of over 700 buildings, they call them, and with more than 100 million club members. So you will understand the size and the sheer power of this growth opportunity. But while this growth was taking place across the traditional or bricks and mortar channels, we found we were just as quickly losing control of our brand and price through resellers on e-commerce channels such as Amazon and iHerb. And despite our best efforts to manage the online channel, the lower our share of the Amazon buy box fell, the more we lost control over our brand and price to independent and often completely unknown resellers. These issues continued to see our offline retailer partner complaining, and quite understandably, about price conflict from other channels. And believe me, this is a big issue. You are growing distribution, and revenue in one channel and losing control in another. Likewise, I think in China, the challenges of running successful brands into the various channels are well documented. Our experiences at both I Love Food and Manuka Health were little different to those you often read about with the likes of Swiss or Blackmores or occasionally A2. China is another highly complex market. I now know that Singles Day or 11/11 can be a rapid way to spend a ton of cash, often at eye-wateringly low margins. And like other markets, China involves a great deal of complexity of managing price across all of these moving parts, as well as staying ahead of things like regulations. In China's case, this involves the giant platforms such as Tmall and JD. However, the Daigou channel brings another interesting level of how you reach and communicate with consumers and build brands into and across China. As your international business activities push deeper into markets, we have typically seen changes to the commercial or financial profile of the business. When you replace a distributor in a market in order to gain greater control over your customer relationships or to drive your brand and ultimately to generate greater sales, you are moving from often a simple pricing model of FOB out of New Zealand to taking on a much larger part of the margin and cost equation. Just be clear on how this unfolds as your business grows into larger accounts, and that you navigate the demands for lower pricing, increase of trading terms, bigger marketing spend commitments, and other on-the-ground support. Really play this out in your modelling so that there are no surprises on the overall business margins as this growth begins to pull through, and ensure that the demands on working capital are safely supported by a strong balance sheet. This is not about scaring us into thinking it is all too hard or too complicated. It is about understanding and respecting the complexities of each and every market so that you build a strong business model which delivers sustainable long-term growth and financial returns. In New Zealand, we know there are hundreds of small brands who have good starts in international markets, either through selling online or offline or a combination of the two. For our country's future growth and prosperity, the challenge becomes how we help these companies grow from selling $1 million or $2 million into a market to building a $40 or $50 million brand and business in that market. If we look at the evolution of many New Zealand export companies, most will be dominated by local teams and resources here in New Zealand, which of course is where these companies first started trading. As your desire to grow an international company develops, the interesting question for me is how does your culture need to evolve along with this to build the companies, to build a more global mindset? From my experiences, I can think of a couple of examples which help push us along this culture curve. Both of these were about building a stronger and more seamless connection to our international teams and their consumers. The sales and marketing team at Manuka Health, for example, built the international consumer firmly into our new product development process. This involved frequent and deep discussions with our teams or partners in Germany, Japan, and China, for example, and meant that we moved the focus from purely designing products based on the local New Zealand market to really listening to what the consumer within a specific market was looking for. This was not simply about changing a product label or moving to a local language. It was, for example, about listening to that market's preferred flavour profile or how and when they consumed our beautiful products. This approach sounds logical and simple, but when you take your time to do it well, not only are you likely to deliver more successful product results for your international businesses, you will also continue to take important and often subconscious steps forward in shaping your business from this New Zealand only to more of a genuine international mindset. The second example is how you attract talent into your international business. And most importantly, how you give these people a sense of true belonging and a strong voice within your business. At George Weston Foods and Manuka Health, we invested in resources on the ground to run a number of overseas markets. I certainly appreciate that this costs money and needs to happen at the right time in your growth journey for each market. Regardless of which countries we placed executives and resources on the ground in, we were always very committed to employing people who shared our values and sense of vision. In all cases, we certainly looked for New Zealanders living abroad. However, we were always balancing this with our need to bring local experience and strong market connections into our business. Starting from this base, it is then a matter of ensuring you have the right mix of formal and informal communication channels to be able to build relationships which allow their voices to be heard clearly and consistently back at head office. This will help ensure they remain both highly engaged but also effective despite the geographical distance. Finally, I would say that almost without exception, the intel and commercial advantage we gained from having people on the ground in our key markets meant that we far outperformed those younger or smaller markets where we serviced a country from the traditional fly-in, fly-out basis from New Zealand. The update on the Manuka Health story is that earlier this year we sold the company from the management shareholders and PEP, which is a large Australian private equity company, into a huge listed conglomerate out of Hong Kong, the Guoco Group. And the Guoco Group are now bringing their even more resources of capital and also their relationships in Southeast Asia to continue to grow that business. So in wrapping up here, I do hope today's discussion has been of interest and has resonated with you. If I could sum up the key points in my experience to building an international business, I would do so in this way. Firstly, create a strategy with your team and stakeholders which harnesses your organisation's natural strengths and capabilities. But make sure this also unleashes the energy and excitement that comes from groups of good, passionate people being a part of a true international culture. Secondly, I think we all understand that the New Zealand story will get us so far, and we certainly all must continue to nurture and protect these values. But to be able to expand beyond the scale of your traditional New Zealand exporter and into a much larger organisation with true international reach, we must excel in product design, supply capability, and brand management as examples. Thirdly, take time to understand your target geographies. Get to grips with the complexities of your core markets and build a model which is going to see you succeed both operationally and commercially well into the future. And lastly, have a good time. New Zealand's future relies on more small to medium-sized companies succeeding on the world stage. Let's embrace this responsibility with a sense of real gratitude and ensure that we take the time to enjoy the endless experiences which come from operating in the global market. For me, this is and always will be about great people like my team at Manuka Health. He aha te mea nui o te ao. Hei tangata, hei tangata, hei tangata. What is the most important thing in this world? It is people, it is people, it is people. Thank you.